Islam has its roots centuries before the birth of the Prophet Muhammad. The people of the new faith were open to many traditional Jewish and Christian beliefs. They shared the concept of one God, many moral values, and even the 10 Commandments. The result is the very heart of Islam, displayed in its glorious art and architecture. In the Islamic faith, God has elevated human beings, both men and women, to the highest possible status. Human beings are deputy to God on earth, and we can know and understand God better through learning. The greatest teacher for Muslims is the Prophet Muhammad, so revered that whenever his name is mentioned, Muslims bless him. But as a Muslim living in the West, I am dismayed at the depiction of my culture and my religion as one of violence, terrorism, and extremism. So in the midst of these negative images, I find inspiration from Islam's true spirit of history. Nothing better illustrates this true spirit than Islam's art and architecture. I have been to some of Islam's great cities to see these marvelous creations. In this series, I will explore the buildings and icons that remind us of Islam's true heritage, its true glories.
In Islam, you have a task. It's not just your belief. Muslims have a duty that you should enlighten other people peacefully and through an argument.
A decade after the death of the Prophet Muhammad in the year 632, Muslim armies swept northward from the Arabian desert, sometimes conquering, sometimes colonizing, sometimes inspiring. They established their capital in Damascus, a city rich in religious tradition. When Muslims first arrived at this gate, which is now a church, in the mid-7th century in Damascus, they were greeted with joy by the local Christians, who saw them as a people who believed in one God and loved and revered Jesus. The first major Islamic dynasty was that of the Umayyads, originally rich traders from Mecca.
The Umayyads were a merchant family who came to Damascus as conquerors and installed themselves in Damascus, which became the first city of the Arab Caliphate at that time. They were open people. Their architecture was famous. They liked poetry, they liked art.
The artistic achievements of the Umayyads were still recognized even when their dynasty was discredited. It is a tragedy for me, as it is for most Muslims, that the earliest surviving great Islamic monument, the first achievement of the Umayyads, is the one which I cannot visit. The Dome of the Rock was built in Jerusalem on the holy ground known to Arabs as the Haram al-Sharif, or Noble Sanctuary. But for all sorts of political and social reasons, it is effectively barred to me. As a Muslim, I feel frustrated and cut off from one of the main roots of my religion. It's even more frustrating when I remember that the very first Muslims prayed not towards Mecca, but to Jerusalem.
This place, the Dome of the Rock, holds a very great significance in Islam. We are lucky that we see it as it was constructed, which means we see the design, we see the plan, we see the geometrical design, and we can judge the people how they used to think and what is their artistic value at that time.
The Haram al-Sharif, which embraces the Al-Aqsa Mosque as well as the Dome, is the third holiest site in Islam after Mecca and Medina. The dome was built at the end of the 7th century by the great Umayyad Caliph Abdul Malik. His great monument is basically an octagon, topped by a massive 25-meter diameter dome.
The shape of the Dome of the Rock is not actually unusual. If we had surviving to us the buildings constructed by the Byzantine Roman Empire, you would have found 8-sided domes all over the place. The Dome of the Rock is a continuation of that building style.
The dome was covered with mosaics which lasted until about the 16th century. Then they became victims of time and the weather and started to fall off. The blue tiles were added by the Ottomans, part of the continuous refurbishment. The grilled windows were added at about the same time, replacing original ones which probably had ironwork on the outside. The extensive decoration was part of a long tradition. The Byzantines, the Christian rulers in the area before the Muslims even arrived, had always enhanced their architecture with spectacular designs. The Muslims took this to new heights. But the Golden Dome itself, that has become a symbol both for Islam and for the city of Jerusalem, is not as it seems.
The dome you see today is not the original. The original dome was made of wood. They're very light, you don't need much to support them to hold them up. But what you're still seeing is gold leaf laid on metal foundation, sitting on very lightweight wood structure. That is the Dome of the Rock.
Inside the dome is the huge rock from which it gets its name. For all the Abrahamic religions, Jews, Christians, and Muslims, this was the place where Abraham attempted to sacrifice his own son. The dome's interior boasts a wealth of calligraphy, Islam's most characteristic art form. At first, calligraphy was the transcription of the holy book, the Quran, so it assumed enormous significance. The earliest material at the dome includes a sequence of carefully drawn Kufic scripts, emphasizing the links between the beliefs of Christianity and those of the new religion, Islam.
In each text, there is a message, there is a thought. Muslims also pay attention to the status of Jesus Christ in the Quran and his mother, Mary, to the extent that some believe this is a diplomatic invitation for the local Christian people to come and join Islam.
When Abdul Malik built the dome, he was of course making a triumphalist statement to his new Christian subjects. But it was a benevolent triumphalism, with the new monotheistic religion embracing the old. Muslim rulers, while anxious to assert their own identity, wanted to incorporate their Christian population, not antagonize it. In Damascus too, religions have learned from each other and embraced some of each other's traditions. The story of one early traveler from Jerusalem to Damascus clearly shows the point. Damascus is a Muslim city, but it is proud of its Abrahamic foundations. Here, St. Paul, on his way to Damascus to arrest Christians, had a vision of Christ, converted to Christianity, and later became a pillar of the church. This street, the Via Recta, where St. Paul famously walked, led to the Temple of Jupiter. The building then became the Church of John the Baptist, and afterwards, the Great Mosque. Just outside the Great Mosque, I can see for myself evidence of the intertwining of religious belief. As later faiths built on earlier ones, so did builders of faith architecture build on the achievements of their predecessors. Here we have a Roman pillar adopted by the Byzantines with Arabic inscriptions. Outside, an Islamic mosque. And what a mosque! I feel awed by the sheer scale of it. It was the first of its type, a congregational mosque, and it was the masterpiece ordered by Abdul Malik's son and successor, Walid. The very spot on which it is built has huge significance.
It is the oldest holy place on earth in which praying was continuously exercised day and night since more than 4,000 years.
It was first a temple, then a church, now a mosque.
If you follow the architecture of this mosque, if you follow the dimension, you will see the outer walls of this mosque were the same outer walls of the Jupiter temple in the Roman time. And it was also the same outer walls of the St. John the Baptist church. They used even the same stones. They used even the same columns, you know.
The Muslims didn't just reuse original columns and stones, they also developed one Byzantine art form in particular to reach new heights. The startling mosaics on the ceremonial entrance to the prayer hall have been heavily restored, yet they are still beautiful and demand attention. The mosaic work on the treasury building in the courtyard is equally dramatic. But the real gems lay behind the western cloister. They are some of the oldest and most impressive artworks of the ancient Muslim world. This is the Paradise panel, so called because it offers the devout a vision of paradise. The panel shows the Barada, the river of Damascus, in a landscape dotted with trees and buildings. But it might once have shown more and different images.
Presenting paradise in a mosque is very typical for an Islamic religion. So this is showing the prayer how paradise looks like. And what good a paradise looks like if it doesn't have water, trees, animals, birds, and whatever. I believe that there were also additional birds and animals in this picture.
Such pictures would have been erased by restorers in a later and more austere age. The very strict would indeed have shunned scenes of wildlife. In general, in Islam, there are no depictions of the human form in a religious context, as it is believed that this diverts from the worship of God, or worse still, is idol worship. The intensity of artistic expression is therefore all poured into calligraphy, garden, and mosque architecture. There are, though, different attitudes to all this in different ages. Fire and earthquake have led to frequent restoration. The worst disaster was a massive fire in 1893. The mihrab or prayer niche showing the direction of Mecca survived. Some of the restorers did get carried away a bit. The careful calligraphy in a few places may look beautiful, but it's really meaningless. Nearby, there's another reminder of the continuity of religious devotion on the spot, the tomb of the Christian John the Baptist. Muslims venerate some Christian saints too. The Great Mosque doesn't just play host to relics of different religions, it plays host to relics of different sects within Islam itself. Although the Great Mosque in Damascus is Sunni, it attracts Shia pilgrims from all over the world. It is said that the head of Hussein, the grandson of the Prophet, is buried here. Many thousands of those pilgrims come from Iran. As Shia, they believe that the true line of succession should have been through Muhammad's own blood relatives and that the Umayyads were usurpers. Whether Hussein's head is here is another matter. This does not deter the pilgrims, though. The Damascus Mosque was a prototype for other mosques, and the layout provided the blueprint. A huge open courtyard was surrounded on 3 sides by a covered arcade or walkway. The courtyard scheme was loosely based on the house of the Prophet Muhammad in Medina, and so had spiritual authority as well as practical benefit. Walid and his designers used a feature which more than any other today symbolizes Islam, the minaret. In practical terms, such tall structures allowed the call to prayer to be heard at the appropriate time, and were also useful as a clear statement that the new Islamic rulers held powerful sway. The Great Mosque in Damascus symbolizes the power, the confidence, and the spiritual commitment of early imperial Islam. In turn, this became the inspiration for mosques throughout the Muslim world. By the 8th century, that Muslim world had spread to Spain. In the Middle East, the Umayyad era had ended with the massacre of the whole ruling family. Just one young man escaped. He fled to Spain and was welcomed as the leader of the Muslims there. His descendants continued the tradition of glorious construction, so it achieved a splendor and grandeur of its own.
Consider what the Umayyads are by this point. They may be a sort of refugee community politically in this distant Spain, but what they really are the inheritors of a very, very sophisticated architectural tradition from Syria and Palestine. That's why the mosque in Cordoba is so sophisticated, why it's so elegant. The expectations of the Umayyads are so great for their architects. It's not experimental architecture. It is a coherent expectation of what fine architecture should be.
The legacy of the Umayyads is mainly in their religious buildings, built under royal patronage. Later rulers shrank from redeveloping mosques which were continuously in use. But there was some fine secular building too. One example is Khirbat al-Mafjar, a royal palace built by another of Abdul Malik's sons. Again, its situation just outside Jericho means most Muslims can't visit it for political reasons. Another kind of politics influenced the location of the palaces. They did not just have recreational functions.
Consider the scale of the Umayyad state. I mean, all the way from Spain to Central Asia. They needed troops, and their loyal allies were the tribes of Syria. So they built palaces in the places where their allies were among the tribes. In the summer, no one in their right mind would go to Khit al-Mafjar. It's 45 degrees in the shade. But in the winter, when there's snow up on the hills above in Palestine, it's a perfectly delightful place to go. And so indeed, they built a great pleasure palace.
The palace was the focus of a farming estate in the shadow of the Mount of Temptation, the mountain where Christ resisted Satan for 40 days and nights. Excavations have revealed a complex 2-story palace with baths, a mosque, courtyards, and colonnades. Brush away the protecting desert sand, and you find the largest mosaic floor known from antiquity. 39 adjoining mosaic panels spread over the massive bathhouse floor. All this revealed an opulent, almost luxurious lifestyle. There are indications of this in many of the surviving palaces, and it is backed up by later literary sources. The mosaic tiles aren't ceramic. They come from rocks hewn from local quarries. Palestinian quarries provide rocks of 22 different colors. On the raised stage in the Caliph's receiving room can be found one of the best known and most treasured images of Islamic art. The floor reveals a picture of an apple tree with 2 gazelles chewing at its foliage. On the right of the tree, another one is being attacked by a lion.
There were lions. There's no shortage of lions. Of gazelles, no shortage at all. Until the machine gun came in, there were gazelles in their thousands wandering around Arabia. The whole environment of the Umayyad period is sort of virtually hinted at by those mosaics at Khilf al-Mafja.
The palace was destroyed by earthquake just before the fall of the Umayyad regime. Before the Islamic story moves on from Jerusalem and the Umayyads, we should remind ourselves that one of their most important buildings, the Al-Aqsa Mosque, lies just a couple of 100 yards away from the Dome of the Rock. But only some of the columns and arcades show sign of its Umayyad origins. The mosque gets its importance not from its decoration. This has changed time and again through the centuries. It is, however, on the spot which makes the Haram al-Sharif so holy to Muslims. It is the place from where the Prophet Muhammad is said to have made a miraculous journey to heaven, and where the earliest mosque was dedicated by Umar, one of the greatest of the early caliphs. His reign is known in history as a period of rapid Islamic expansion. It is under Umar that Muslims first took Jerusalem. It is one of Islam's most significant sites in one of the most significant of cities.
Well, Jerusalem is unique because no other Islamic city had the same sort of history. You have the original early Islamic Umayyad Dome of the Rock Al-Aqsa. You have a long period of peace under Islam. You have the Crusades. The Crusades cause vast amounts of destruction, and the Muslims then have to rededicate the buildings back to Islam.
The Crusaders had defiled the holiest of buildings. They had used Al-Aqsa as stables and as a sort of barracks for the Knights Templar. The man who saved the mosque became a legend. He restored Al-Aqsa for Islam. He seized back Jerusalem. His name was Saladin. Saladin left his mark all over the Middle East. Different regimes had come and gone, but he was the first of a new line of rulers, the Ayyubids. At his capital Damascus, his victories were recorded on the city walls as they occurred. Saladin's tomb is just outside the Great Mosque. It has proved a magnet to military men, including recent occupiers like the French. When the French general entered Damascus after the First World War, he kicked at the tomb of Saladin and said, "Awake, Saladin, we have returned." In a sense, the memory of the Crusades has never really left the Middle East. And the man who symbolizes the Muslim side is Saladin, the pious, the just, the noble, and above all, the victorious.
The thing that really strikes me most about Salah ad-Din is he died a powerful king and a powerful ruler. But the most striking thing is that he died poor. He had nothing when he died. He had no property. He gave it all away before. That's the point that I really love about Salah ad-Din.
300 kilometers north of Damascus lies the historic city of Aleppo. There, Saladin's influence was through his son. The mighty citadel dominates everything around. Saladin's son, Al-Zahir Ghazi, rebuilt and restored the citadel after an earthquake, but the story of the citadel goes back much further.
It's probably one of the largest castles anywhere. And different civilizations at different times built different sections of this castle. And that's why it's such an important historical site.
Over centuries, it survived earthquake and siege, only submitting to the fiercest of enemies. The citadel provided protection for the surrounding city's inhabitants in the event of attack. Inside, the achievements of Saladin's Ayyubid successors are being uncovered by today's excavations. The courtyard of the royal palace is marked by huge stones, some more than a meter long. These were a hallmark of Ayyubid architecture. The Ayyubids also liked to establish symmetry. The doorways and niches are austere and simple, compared with the more intricately decorated examples from later periods. The immense stonework and commanding position made the citadel almost impregnable. It couldn't, however, resist Temur, the conquering warrior known in the West as Tamerlane.
The only time that it was taken by storm was during the time of Tamerlane, whose troops scaled the sides of the castle and they took it by storm. Otherwise, it was always either surrendered or taken by trick.
Despite the murder and mayhem wreaked by Tamerlane, the city recovered to regain its importance. The Sultan, or perhaps the city governor, could look out from the heights of the citadel onto a bustling center of international trade.
In the 15th and 16th century, the city was one of the major cities on the Silk Route from China all the way to Europe. Aleppo was a place of the exchange that took place in the goods that came from the east and the goods that came from the west.
Sold alongside the silks and spices, they're examples of Muslim crafts that have remained unchanged for centuries. Back in Damascus, I found plenty of examples of the intricate metalwork and jewelry so prized by the Bedouin.
These are temple jewelry made to be worn by a lady during ceremonies. As we see, they are made out of gold. And triangle means always the stopping of the evil eye with a blue stone in the middle. You would find it in the embroidery, in the carvings. You find it in wood, in marble, and as well as in jewelry.
There is Islamic symbolism even
Definitely.
in
Definitely, as well as the
coins?
suspended coins. They all date back to the 19th century. They're Turkish coins, because as you know, Turkey was the dominant power in the Middle East.
What is this?
This is a belt buckle, which is the only jewelry worn by a woman in ceremonies. She would not wear something like this on a daily basis, but it's a ceremonial jewelry, and at the same time, it's a proof of her social status. The more rich she is, the more elaborate the belt buckle would be. In the desert, the culture was still typical Oriental, very old, and as if frozen in time for centuries.
The Bedouin often attacked traders making their way between the major cities. In defense, the traders would form up into caravans for a safer desert crossing. On arrival in the cities, they would be offered rest and shelter in caravanserais or khans. The courtyards of these inns provided the traders an opportunity to display their wares. Not much has changed today. The satellite dishes have sprouted, and foul-smelling camels and mules have been replaced by foul-smelling pickup trucks. The ground floor stables have now become storerooms. The upper floors still offer accommodation for relaxing traders. The other typical Ayyubid building in Aleppo is the Al-Firdaus Madrasa.
The madrasas are centers for education, mostly religious education, and they were brought in to unify the Syrian society.
The fountain in the middle illustrates some of the Muslim fascination for mathematics and geometry. The Ayyubids particularly liked the shape formed by the two squares on top of each other. It forms an 8-pointed star. The incomplete circle with angled sides was another Ayyubid favorite. The madrasa has two large Iwans. These are rooms with 3 closed sides and a 4th open, usually onto a courtyard. A similar Ayyubid madrasa in Damascus stands in a narrow street immediately opposite a much later Mamluk madrasa. The doorways of the two buildings highlight their differences.
The Ayyubids brought with them a sense of military style. So architecturally, they're very somber, and they use very well-constructed masonry. The Ayyubids, as you can see by the Adliya porter, are much more somber and elegant and less colorful. Whereas if you look at the Mamluk madrasa just across the street, you'll see a much more colorful approach and more contrast in the colors of the stones, more intricate inscription in the calligraphy, and generally more details. It's not as somber as the Ayyubid style, much more showy.
A madrasa frequently doubled as a mausoleum for its patron. This Mamluk madrasa houses the tomb of King Baybars, a brilliant military leader who, like Saladin, was a scourge of the Crusaders. The wealth of religious architecture in Syria is matched by some stunning secular architecture. Damascus has a rich store of old courtyard houses. They're almost the trademark of the city. They reflect a lifestyle which lasted for centuries.
The decoration of the houses in Damascus just takes us Westerners aback. I mean, I was literally freaked out the first time I saw one of these painted palaces in Damascus. And the thing is, it's so theatrical, it builds up to it. You're walking down this dingy lane, you can't see any windows, and then you see a dingy entrance, and they were deliberately kept dingy, the entrances, so as not to be overtaxed by the government in the old days. And then you open the door into the courtyard, and there is this amazing sunlit scene with fountains playing.
This beautiful heritage is threatened by time, neglect, and lack of money. A few brave souls are struggling to save some of the old city houses from the wreckage.
Ever since I was a young child, we would come very often to the old city with my father, and this is part of the love of our lives, actually, because it has kept its spirit, and it's a magical place to go to.
Thalia Khair's house comes with its own history. It was built by a rich family who later fell on hard times. It changed hands several times, and there's plenty of surviving evidence of the different restorations and styles. In a city dominated by old families, new money has played its part.
Every person that came in put a little bit of their touch in it. So every time you see a change, you see a different style, and especially the latest one inspired by the wealth and European style.
Some of the most prodigious house builders in Damascus were the Azam family. This is the Bait Azam, one of a number of houses named after them. The powerful family had earned their fame by subduing the desert Bedouin. 3 Azams became governors of Damascus in the 18th century. All these houses had a broadly similar layout.
You would have an entrance which was usually bent at an angle so that people passing in the street couldn't see inside the courtyard, because for a stranger to see inside the courtyard, to see women in the courtyard, is absolutely forbidden in the Islamic world. So the first courtyard would be the main reception courtyard where the man would receive his friends and where the women could be at any time so long as there were no strangers present.
The open E01 faces north to get the maximum shade in a stiflingly hot Syrian summer, while the formal rooms face south to absorb the maximum warmth in winter.
There would be the grand reception salon, which was called the car. And this is a fantastic room. In every house, it's the grandest room. There's usually a very ornamental fountain, and all of this is highly decorated. Then there's a 2-foot step onto a seating platform, which is usually made of wood, and all around the edge of that room would have been seats or cushions where people would sit. And it was absolutely forbidden. The worst social gaffe you could make would be to stand on that platform wearing shoes. You had to take your shoes off before you got on the platform. And then on this platform you would be served meals and smoke your nargile pipe, hubble bubble pipe, and so on. But this was only for men. This is where men entertained.
Another of the fine houses still to be seen in Damascus is the Beit Nizam, which had many owners over the years and for a time was the French consulate.
This was a house that was frequented by foreigners and so on, and the owners always looked a little bit to the west. And so the decoration tended to be very modern, and very modern in that time was something a little bit more European than the traditional Arab decoration. In the earlier decorated houses, there's geometric decoration on the lower part of the house, and then a gap on the wall, and then a very decorated ceiling. But in the late 19th century, they began to fill up this gap with wall paintings of sort of almost European scenes, and Beit Nizam has that kind of decoration.
A feature of this house and of all the great courtyard houses of Damascus is the prominent mother-of-pearl decoration. This very Middle Eastern craftsmanship is much prized in Damascus. This workshop has been in the same family for 200 years. Methods haven't changed much over that time, although the pearl now is shaped with electrical grinders. The shapes are carved out first and the silver thread fitted round them before the oyster shell mother of pearl is laboriously ground into shape. The silver thread is a particularly Syrian feature. It is missing from mother-of-pearl work from Egypt. In both Damascus and Jerusalem, the new Muslim rulers inherited a rich and ancient culture. They borrowed aspects of this to establish their own identity, and in turn, their own form of art and architecture. Islam's great contribution was to add another sophisticated and rich piece to the already dazzling mosaic. It is this legacy that gives me pride as a Muslim, and it is the common part of the shared traditions that gives me hope for the future.